Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia. Maybe you know me as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. And joining us today is another author making their official debut here on the show. Now, my guest today is a retired 32-year surface warfare officer and Naval Academy and Naval War College graduate who served more than 10 years at sea in destroyers and frigates. A dedicated sailor for over half a century, he also commanded a tall ship. It's also published two novels, Against All Enemies and In Harm's Way, both of which have earned awards. Accurate history and authentic settings are his obsession, and the reviews he's most proud of come from Navy veterans who said of Against All Enemies that they could smell the stale coffee and cigarette smoke in sick. He resides in Brooklyn with his wife and daughter and a cat and dog, and whatever free time he has is still spent on the water. And you can find all of his work on his website, which I'll provide the link down below in the description of this video. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a huge round of applause to our guest today, Mr. Thomas Wing. Thomas, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Gabriel. Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, Thomas. Absolutely. Now, before we begin this amazing author interview, do you actually have a copy of one of your books that you'd like to share with the viewers and listeners?
I do. I've got my newest one, which was released by Acorn Publishing just yesterday.
Woo,
Had the
congratulations.
book launch on board the HMS Rose. Everybody knows her as the HMS Surprise, the frigate that was used in the film Master and Commander. She's down at the Maritime Museum in San Diego, and we had the book launch aboard her. It was a really good event. So, again, I spent some time on the water.
Nice, nice, Thomas. Nice. Now, before we dive into your background, not only as a veteran and also an author, can you share with us a random fact about you that not a lot of people may know about?
Uh, so obviously, I have traveled the world as part of my Navy duties. A random fact that I, I share occasionally, but not often, is one of my favorite drinks came from Brazil when we were visiting my sister-in-law and her husband. He worked for GM, and they were, I'll call it, stationed there for about 3 years. It's a caipirinha. It's really good and it's really potent, but so you can only have one or two. But yeah.
Nice, Thomas. Nice. All right. So now let's start at the very, very beginning
Okay.
of this story. So when you got, well, actually, let me say this. What got you invested to join the Navy first and foremost?
Hmm.
Like, was that a family thing? Did you have members in your family who served in the Navy? Or was this something that you were very passionate about from the get go?
It was both. I was passionate about it, and I grew up in North Idaho on the shores of the big lake up there, Lake Pend Oreille, and so boating. We moved up there when I was 9. Boating was a big deal. I know that my uncle had served in the Navy during World War II. My dad was in the Army during World War II. I had a couple other uncles in the various services. My namesake was in the Navy during World War II. Um, I'm named for him because he died before I was born. But so from I went to I ordered my first Naval Academy catalog when I was 9 years old. So I always wanted to go there. From that point, it was just a matter of making it happen.
All right, all right. Now, as you were traveling all over the world in, submarines and frigates and with your crew, did the passion for writing come about during that time, or was it after you had left the service that that's when you wanted to take what you've learned about the Navy and apply it to, writing and to history?
Well, so actually, I started writing in high school. I had always kind of told myself stories. I can't even remember when I started doing that, trying to fall asleep at night, for example. I would tell myself stories or make up stories where, as any little kid, you're usually the hero, right? In
Hmm.
high school, I wrote poetry, usually really stupid, stupid poetry. Um, but I actually sold my first short story in 1991, after about, what was that, 7 years after graduation. Um, the Navy kept me busy enough that writing was a little bit more difficult. I was on shore duty at the time, and so I sold it to a San Diego news magazine that is now defunct. Not my fault. Um, but yeah, that was the first writing that I actually sold. I was I did something that any aspiring author out there, please don't do this. Uh, don't wait to show your material to somebody until you're in your 50s. I showed my first novel that I completed to my writing mentor. He became my writing mentor. To my cousin's husband when I was actually I was 48 when I did that, and that was way too late because he said was honest. He said I was prepared to tell you that you have a long way to go before you can do anything with your writing. He said actually it was pretty good, just a polishing. It could be published. I still waited another 10 years to show it to Holly Kmeyer, the one of the co-owners of Acorn Publishing, and she said you need to rewrite the chapter one completely from scratch. But yeah, we'll work with you. You need to go through a content edit. All along that whole time, I had been writing. Um, it was just a matter of not showing it to anybody, including mostly my wife. I didn't show her most of my stuff. But I've always loved to write. I've always loved to tell stories.
All right, Thomas. I feel you. I feel you. Now, when you began your first two books, ultimately for you as the author, what was the goal you had for each of them and the promise, not just to yourself as the author, but to fans of the genre and also service members in the Navy who would find connections along the way?
So the first book that was published was Against All Enemies. I wrote that in 2016. I was up front. I was listening to all of the primaries on all sides of the political spectrum, and I was listening to what I felt were bad ideas related to our relationship with China. And a story came to me. I'd always wanted to write a destroyer captain, preferably a modern destroyer captain. I'd always wanted to write a Tom Clancy style book because Tom Clancy was one of the 4 or 5 authors that really inspired me. So the story came to me fairly quickly. I wrote it in 9 months. I finished it in November 2016, and it was intended sort of to be a warning of policies have consequences, and foolish policies can have catastrophic consequences. Um, with respect to the Navy component of it, because most of it's based on a destroyer in the South China Sea, I wanted Navy veterans to read it and go, "Yeah, he understands what it's like to be in the CIC of a warship fighting." Firing missiles, firing guns. He's been there, obviously. And I wanted people who have not been in the Navy but who are interested in it to understand that I was trying to present it in an authentic way. The orders flow, the ship shivering when the gun fires, those kinds of things.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about the characters in both of those books. And I think you may have already answered this previously in terms of like how overall you wanted to feel authentic and very real to where people who weren't in the service could get a sense of it. And those who are or were in the service can say, as you mentioned, he knows what he's talking about. He's done the research. So, in regards to the characters themselves, how did you make them feel authentic and real and not caricatures that would be presented in other works?
That's a really good question. They all are amalgams. The main characters are all amalgams of people I've known. And in fact, on Sunday, we had the book launch, and my old CO from my third ship uh, arrived, and he and I had reconnected. Oh, probably 6 months ago, but we hadn't seen each other for 30 years. And I had to tell him that the captains of both my books were partially, at least partially, and maybe even mostly based on his reactions to crises and good events as well. Not wholly based on him, but I pieced together the best parts of a bunch of leaders I knew. There's another a Commodore that I served under. He became a Vice Admiral finally. That I based some of his, and in fact, some of the wording in my first book actually came from something he had said during he was briefing pilots before the invasion of Iraq. And he said, "Don't worry, you'll do fine." And I thought that was such a good phrase that I put it in the book. But yeah, they're amalgams of people I knew. And so it's easier to write them and make them real and authentic because they're based on real people.
Right, absolutely. Now, among all the characters, main characters and side characters, who was probably your favorite to really write and flesh out, and which character or characters were the most difficult to really divulge, whether it's a side character or maybe one of the villains in the stories?
That's an interesting question. I think I probably have my main characters are probably my favorites, but I do have favorites among the secondary characters, and I think the two are, and they're very, very different. I have a female admiral in charge of Seventh Fleet in my first book, and I really enjoyed. She's obviously a naval officer, so it's easier for me to write her because I wasn't writing a female; I was writing a naval officer. But I gave her some quirks and some personality that I really enjoyed writing. And again, that was based on a couple, three other people that I knew. But it was fun writing scenes that she was in because she's very decisive. She also likes to inject a little bit of humor, especially during tense situations, to try and ramp down the tension and stress that her staff is feeling. The other character I really liked, secondary, was John Masefield. He's the first mate of the Revolutionary War era privateer that my second and third books are about. And he's gruff. He's descended from Scottish people who came to America for a better life. He's also very decisive, and he has absolutely no desire to command anything, but he is a really good antagonist for the captain, and he tries to drag the captain to doing the right thing, especially in the second book of that series, where the captain is kind of out of control, rage driven, and John Masefield is the even keel that keeps things going on the ship, and he tries to rein in the captain's worst impulses.
All right, all right. Now, this next question is probably, one of my favorite questions about, the writing process. And that is, of course, are you a planner slash organizer, or are you more of a spontaneous writer?
I am both, and it's going to be a longer answer than maybe you want. Sorry. I'm a
No,
planter.
go ahead.
I'm a planter. The first book that I wrote was the second published, and I almost didn't publish that one. I took 30 years to write that. I started in 1995, and I had every chapter was mapped out. It had 2 paragraphs at least of this is what's going to happen in this chapter. This is going to how it ends. And by the third chapter, once I actually started writing, I was so far off that I had to redo it. And I redid it 2 or 3 times before I realized that I needed to be a little bit more flexible. So the second book, Against All Enemies, the modern Tom Clancy style, was not well outlined, and it ended up being 140,000 words. We had to cut it to 95,000. Yeah. And that was painful. And that was my education into don't just wing it and write off the seat of your pants. And so the next book was a little better planned out. I kind of had a description of a series of events. They weren't laid out by chapters, but these were the events I knew that needed to happen along the way. And then I started writing, and I would fill in additional detail, and then I started chapterizing it. And that seemed to work. And so the fourth book, which I just finished wrapping up this last week, I did the same thing, and it worked pretty well. I actually finished that one in 4 months, which surprised me.
That is impressive. That is absolutely impressive, Thomas. For me as a writer, I think usually take about almost a full year to write just one of my books, just because I find myself doing a lot of rewrites and a lot of revisions along the way. And currently, my one of my projects is record to be my longest in terms of word counts.
Mm.
It's looking at to be maybe 300,000 words, which is
Wow.
a lot. So I have to cut down on that, because and that's just the first book in a trilogy. That's the first book in a
Mhm.
trilogy. I have to cut down a lot of fluff for that. But it's interesting to see like what I'm capable of as a writer to write that
Mhm.
much. And in writing that, there have been some favorite moments in chapters, which leads to a fan question one of my viewers would like to know, Thomas. And this
Yeah.
may border on a little bit of spoilers, so give as much or as little. But in all of your books, is there a favorite chapter that you absolutely love, whether it's the characters or the way it
Mhm.
flows, or just that particular chapter is just good? Like it's your best work that you've written.
There probably is in each of them. Who was it that said writing is rewriting? Because you mentioned it too. Revising and rewriting is very painful.
Mm.
Um, there have been in each of them a chapter that I've gone back through when I'm doing the revisions, third or fourth revisions, and I've said, "Wow, did I write that?" Because that one's actually pretty good as is. And they were always action scenes. Now that I think about it, um, battle scenes where it just seemed to flow well as it was coming out my fingertips. So yeah, I think that each of them probably does, and they're action scenes. They're usually battle scenes because that's what I write.
Nice. Very, very nice. Now, I know you mentioned earlier in the interview that you did not tell a lot of people about the books you have written, or some of the books in their initial stages in your journey. But I'm very curious for you, Thomas, as an author, in the early beginnings of your journey, when did you feel confident in your writing style and your ability to craft engaging stories to say that, you know what, I am an author? I'm not a writer. I am an author. I know how to tell good stories, because I've talked with a lot of people on the show for the last 8 years. This seems to be the one question that stumps a lot of people, because there is that hesitancy to take ownership of, am I a writer? Am I an author? Am I both? I would like to hear your thoughts on this.
I will let you know when I start to feel like an author. I'm being a little facetious, but it is still. I've been going to this same writers conference for since 2017. So what's that? 9 years now, and it is. And I'm good friends with the woman who runs a nightly Rogue Read and Critique. It's called. She's also my editor. Um, I still feel like I'm standing naked on the Carnegie Hall stage with a packed house when she reads something I've written. When did I start to feel like an author? I think it is a hard question. I think I started to last year. I started to review books for the Military Writers Society of America for their awards program, and they have a really good awards program. 3 readers, you read each book, and there's a set of grading criteria, so it's very objective. Um, as I was reading some of the submissions, is when I started to realize, actually, I'm fairly decent. So I'm an author. My books are fairly decent. They have some fantastic books that get submitted, and they have some that just they're not that great. Uh,
Mm.
and the craft, it's the craft. The stories in most cases were really good. The craft was very poorly executed. And that I think that was probably when I started to feel like, actually I can do this.
Nice. Very,
So that
very
is a good
nice.
question.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, this is another fan question. That's actually the
Mhm.
first one I've gotten. And this viewer would like to know, if someone were to pick up any of your three books,
Mhm.
which would you say is the one that all readers should read to get an idea and understanding of your writing style?
Because the last two are in a trilogy about the American Revolution, I would say I'm a better writer today than I was when I wrote the book in 2016. So I would say In Harm's Way would be the best one to pick up, because I think that best exemplifies my writing style. And the character is not rage driven as he is in the second book.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that's another hard question.
It
That's a good
is.
one.
It is. And it definitely makes us think of, which book can we say is like the best one to introduce us, because we write in so many different styles. Sometimes we write in different genres. We cross genre
Yeah.
just to test ourselves. It's a lot. It's a lot to definitely think of. Now, these next two are go hand in hand together. And that is, of course, authors dealing with the dreaded writer's block and authors dealing with imposter syndrome. Now, for you, Thomas, how have you dealt with these two prominent things that plague all authors?
I'm going to say something that's counterintuitive, and I'm going to say I don't think I've ever experienced writer's block. There are days when I'm sitting in front of the computer and I don't write every day. I wish I did. Um, and it's not coming. And so what I've done was something that George Galdarese, who writes the Tom Clancy Op Center books now, recommended. He said, just start writing something, anything. Write what the color of the carpet is. Just put something on paper or in the computer, and the flow will come. And he's been right every single time. I will just start, and I won't go to the color of the carpet, but I'll write what the weather is like today. And the words start to flow, and then I get back into the story, and it brings me back around.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, these next set of questions focus on what I like to call the reflective side of being an author. And these focus on what does it mean to be an author in the digital age, because
Mhm.
the industry has definitely changed with the rise of social media and everything like that, with also generative AI written content being put into books, those books being sold in bookstores, authors coming out and saying they've used generative AI to write their books. And it's just a lot. It is a lot. Social media has definitely changed the game. The internet has definitely
Yeah.
changed the game. It seems overwhelming in the face of an era of artificially mass produced imagination. So, for you, Thomas, what has still disciplined you to tell the stories not only you want to tell, but to really showcase the power of human imagination when it comes to writing great stories?
So my inspirations were C.S. Forrester, Patrick O'Brien, Herman Wouk, and those guys were master storytellers. They were master craftsmen. And so, from the perspective of generative AI, I do use it for research, but I double check everything it tells me. The good news is that it gives me the references it used to find the answer that I asked. So I can quickly go to the reference. Sometimes the references are really hard to find on my own, and that's the advantage that AI gives me, is that it finds references that I might not have had access to or known about even. Um, and so I do double check everything, and AI has lied to me a couple times, hallucinated, I guess they call it.
Mm-hmm.
So that keeps me on my toes. With respect to actually using AI to write anything, I can't bring myself to do it. I realize there are people who do, and I don't begrudge them, but I know that I can put things into my stories, the emotions, the feelings, the sensations, the smell of the ocean, the feel of the ship rocking under you, that I don't think AI can do. And I'm not willing to experiment. I don't think they can do it. So, yeah, you mentioned social media, and that is a wow. That was
Mhm.
an interesting, and is still an interesting thing to be working through and learning. I still struggle with my social media. I've considered hiring an fellow author's daughter to run the social media for me. She's in her 30s, and she's much better at it. I don't have the money to do it right now, but I spend, I would estimate, 2 hours a day doing marketing or social media, and that takes me away from things I like to do, which is writing and hanging out with my family, because I'm retired now and I wanted to hang out with my family more. So that's, yeah, the social media is it's a big deal that you just have to deal with as an author, because it's your primary path to readers, to getting your information out to readers. Uh,
Yes,
yeah,
very true. Very
yeah.
true. Now let's talk about another set of questions within the reflective side. And that is, of course, going back to your bio, which also says that your books have also won awards as well, which is a huge accomplishment, a huge achievement. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on what that means to you as an author, because I've heard some discussions of, a lot of authors going into contests, some people saying that, oh, why should you submit your work into contests? You're a good writer. Why do you need, an award to like say that? And there's been a lot of conflicting answers I've gotten on this question, but I would like to hear it from you, Thomas, and your experiences when your books were awarded the
Mhm.
awards they got. What did that mean to you, not only as a person, but also as the man who created these incredible works?
That's another really good question. So people had told me that you need to. In fact, the publisher told me that they would submit me to a few awards or recommend a few awards. And so I submitted to those programs: Indie Author Excellence, Reader's Favorite, those kinds of things. And those, for me, especially as we mentioned imposter syndrome earlier, and I have a raging case to that most of the time. For me, submitting to those award programs was seeking validation. It was very hard to submit because 32 years in the Navy, I never submitted myself for my own awards. Um, the way it works in the military is, if you've had a good tour or you participated in something that was substantial, uh, they will usually, captain will come to you and say, hey, I think you did a good job on the OPI evaluation. Why don't you write yourself up for a Navy Achievement Medal? And I just couldn't do it. So I refused generally. And it left me not getting nearly as many medals as other people did. So submitting for an award was really hard. I think I was seeking validation. You do have to be warning to other writers and authors out there. You have to be careful about which ones you submit to. I submitted to 3 book festival awards that I found out later, after I had actually even attended a $150 per person award ceremony dinner. I found out that the single family runs 38 awards programs, and they make like $2.5 or $3 million a year off of the awards programs that authors are submitting their books to. And you get a certificate, and you pay for a mediocre buffet at a pretty decent hotel in Hollywood. And it really struck home when because they put, at the award ceremony, they put the covers of the books that had won the award when they call the author up. And one of them had a glaring typo in the title and the cover, and they had won
Ooh.
a gold medal. And so that made me dig a little deeper, and that's when I found out that this one family runs 38 award programs. So
Nope.
you got to be careful.
Yes.
But yeah, I was seeking validation, and that's why the Military Writers Society actually is the one that I put on my books, because that one is an objective set of criteria. 3 evaluators, they have to agree. I feel like that one means something.
Absolutely true. Absolutely. I've always been on the fence about applying to awards myself because you never know if they are legitimate or not.
Yeah.
But I think this year I am actually going to try to submit my works to award ceremonies just to see, just to test my luck and just to see, here it is. Even if I don't win, at least I say like I was a finalist. That's
Mhm.
something, an achievement in of itself, because I never would have thought or believed my work would be there. But I think this year is going to be, a change of pace, something that I am going to be doing. And
And that's exactly why you should do it. Yeah, because it is a validation, especially if it's one that you respect.
absolutely, very true, Thomas. Now let's actually talk about the business side of being an author. Now, as an icebreaker question for this, when you published, going back to your first book that you've written, what really surprised you about, the marketing aspect of being an author? Because it is not easy to say the least.
Yeah. you, you could say that 100 more times. Um, I think I think a lot of us go into it, the publishing process. I was ecstatic that a publisher was willing to work with me. And I hoped for, this is going to sound stupid, but, I was hoping for that Stephen King marketing help, where they have this marketing group that goes out and they take care of all of that for you. They advertise on Amazon and blah, 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 blah. And I think that was the wake up call was, yeah, marketing is pretty much on you. And
Mhm.
then I met she's become a good friend. She writes, she writes across genre. Almost every book is a different genre. But she had published traditionally, and her 4th or 5th book was traditionally published, sold 145,000 copies in the first year, which is pretty phenomenal. They gave her a nice $25,000 advance. She earned out in about 3 years. That's a sad thing. But she said, yeah, no marketing, none at all. The publisher, and it was one of the big 4, said, you're kind of on your own for publishing. We only reserve publishing dollars for the really, really big authors, or the ones we think we're going to sell at least 1 million copies. Yeah. And marketing is tough. It's, you know, what works for you may not work for me, even if we were writing in the same genre.
Absolutely, very true. Very true. And on this topic of genre, it is important to discuss, the audience involved too, because for us as authors, we know our stories front and back. We know what type of stories we like to write. When it comes to sharing that work, that's when we have to sometimes change it up a little bit and find this balancing act between our voice as the author, our individuality, but also being mindful of the genre we're writing in, because some fans have certain expectations of how certain books are supposed to go. Let's say if you write a book that is very much a Tom Clancy inspired story, for people who have read Tom Clancy or know of his
Yeah.
work, they expect the story to go a certain way, or they expect the characters in said story to act a certain way. And 9 times out of 10, they may be right or they may be wrong. But it's this balancing act we always find ourselves in. So for you, Thomas, how have you been able to balance the two to showcase the strengths of both?
That has probably been my biggest challenge. The first book I mentioned was Tom Clancy's style, but I ran into a roadblock. Tom Clancy put a lot of technical detail. He explained how sonar and radar worked in a very easy to read, and it kept the flow going way in his books. And he the first one I ever read, he strayed into what I absolutely knew was classified information. And I don't know how he got it, but he strayed into it. But because he was not in the military, that was okay. He got away with it. Because I had a high clearance, I had to run my book through this special security office at my command and the public affairs office at my command. And so I could not write that level of technical detail that he did. And that is what Tom Clancy fans expect. And so that one has not done as well among that fan group as my historical fiction. The historical fiction for seagoing warfare, you have to have lots of sailing terms, you have to have lots of sea battles, and you have to have storms. And that is much easier to get through because I still have to run everything I write through the military to make sure I'm not accidentally disclosing classified info. So those are much easier to write. And it's easier to meet the expectations. You're right.
Absolutely, very true. And let's actually talk about writing in historical fiction, because I've had the opportunity to talk with a lot of historical fiction writers for this year than I've done previously. And it is very nice to see, the historical fiction genre in a way make a comeback, because for a long time, historical fiction has kind of been dominated by the subgenre of historical romance. Those books are good, but they're not entirely the basis of historical fiction. Historical fiction touches on a wide range of other topics and other subgenres in history. So, as you were writing your historical fiction series, how much research did you do to, balance out the authenticity and accuracy, but also just write a fun story and engaging narrative for readers?
That was a very difficult balance. I have always read. I grew up. My parents had probably 5,000 volumes in their library, and my dad was a historical history buff mostly, but he also had some historical fiction. So I read a lot of historical fiction. So I'd already picked up a lot of the history. I have probably 6 or 8 feet of shelf space of just Revolutionary War at sea books. And I read, I can't admit to reading all of it, but I read most of them to make sure I was historically accurate. Because I also want to make sure that my history is accurate. I like dumping my characters and seeing how they react to events that actually happened. To me, it's much more interesting than making up events or making huge changes to real events. But yeah, it's been a difficult balance, and I still, and I get wrapped around the axle as I am doing right now in this answer. I will be example. I was revising a scene the other day, and it was about the Penobscot River, and I actually went to the Penobscot River and I walked the area where this battle happened, like my fake battle that was based on a real one happened. And I went back and I spent half an hour looking at the pictures I had taken, because I took dozens, to make sure that I described and it ended up being the scene properly. And it ended up being only half a paragraph, but I spent total time, probably a good hour, doing that research for 3 sentences. So it's a difficult balance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now we get into my favorite portion of the interview, the rapid fire fan question round.
Ruh-roh.
So these are questions that I've gotten by my viewers over the years, and a lot of my guests love them. So let's see how we do with these questions, Thomas.
Okay.
So the first question is, as a storyteller and as a reader, which you prefer in your books, themes or tropes?
Themes, definitely.
Nice.
Yeah, there's a recurring theme across all 4 of my books.
Awesome. Awesome. Follow up. Which is, in your opinion, the most overused trope or plot element in storytelling, and the most underused plot element?
Ooh. So most overused, I'll narrow it to nautical fiction. The most overused is there is a mutineer aboard, or a wannabe mutineer aboard, and he's actively trying to subvert other members of the crew, whether he intends mutiny openly or not. He's just a bad actor.
Right.
Underused trope. Oh, that one's a hard question. Um, yeah, I'm not sure that I can answer that one. Even if I narrow myself to historical fiction or to military thrillers, because I think all the ones that I can name are probably in use somewhere. It's something I've read. So yeah, I don't think I'd answer that one.
Yeah, that's always often the most difficult one. I mean, we can always think of the most overused, but underused. Yeah, that is definitely a hard one. If I was also to say, for within historical fiction, which you can also maybe apply to nautical fiction,
Mhm.
I would definitely say maybe either Found Family would be definitely one. Another one I would definitely say maybe, even though this kind of borders on overuse, depending on how you use it, an underdog story in historical fiction. I would definitely think that. Yeah, there's a lot you can definitely choose from. And speaking of nautical fiction, I'm very curious if you can answer this next fan question.
Okay.
Of the five physical senses, which is the most difficult to write in storytelling?
Taste. That for me has always been, I've added, because Patrick O'Brien had a lot of food in his series, and it's so his non Master and Commander series books too. I've added some in the last couple books, but yeah, taste is the most difficult for me.
All right, all right. Next one. This is a scenario question.
Mhm.
You're given an unlimited budget to adapt either one or all three or all four of your books into one of the following mediums. The first medium is a television or limited series directed by a man of your choice, and you get priority choosing on the actors and actresses and either the film adaptations or the limited series adaptations. Option two, full audiobook production with some of the best voice actors and narrators in the business. Which medium do you choose and why?
I wish I was going to choose audiobook, but I am going to choose the either short series or a series, and probably my Revolutionary War series. Um,
Before that, you say you're going to choose the limited series or series, and you were going looking at your historical fiction series, correct?
yeah, yeah, definitely
Nice.
Tom Hanks as the director.
Ooh, that's a good one. That's a really, really good one. All right. Here is the next rapid fire question. As an author, which you find to be the most difficult? And you kind of touched on this in the beginning. Knowing when to stop writing or editing, or knowing when to say the story is finished.
You're right. For me, in the first two books, because both of those books went to 140,000 words, knowing when to stop was really important. And I think that's one of the reasons I love my editor. She has, she not only edits, but she teaches. And so she has helped me understand what kinds of things are, they may be really exciting to write, but they don't move the story forward. And that that's always the question, right? What
Yeah,
moves the story forward? And I've done much better with the last two, understanding that this scene may be fun, but it needs to go in the cut material, get filed away for some future use. Um,
absolutely. Absolutely, Thomas. Now, as we come to the final rapid fire question, before we go into the last question of the interview, the final rapid fire question is this:
hmm,
what is the one genre that you would like to write in, if only just one time, and why?
Science fiction. I loved Isaac Asimov, Ed Heinlein, Hamilton, whole bunch of authors from the 50s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And I would love to write a science fiction novel one time.
Awesome. Awesome. And now we arrive at the final question of this incredible author interview, Thomas. With everything we talked about and more about your journey in the Navy, how you approach storytelling, how you look at the marketing side, the business side, and more. Ultimately, at the end of the day, what do you want people to take away from your stories, from your bodies of work?
Ordinary people can do extraordinary things when pushed to do so. The theme across all mine are those who will not risk cannot win. It's something John Paul Jones said. And I think that that is a lesson for all of us in life, whether the risk is stepping outside and trying a new food that you've never tried before, or the risk is traveling to a foreign country to experience something completely different than what we have here in America. If you don't risk, you may never even realize you haven't won, but you are not going to have the whole life that you could have.
Perfect. Absolutely perfect, Thomas. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, we conclude another amazing author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. Want to give a huge thank you to Thomas Wing for coming on the show. And we wish him the very best on his journey, as well as the launch of his newest book, which I am so excited for him. Now, Thomas, where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out and connect, as well as buy copies of all of your books?
So all the books are available on all the online sellers. Social media, I have a website, thomasmwing.com. Social media, I'm mostly on Facebook, Thomas M. Wing Writer. I'm on Twitter as well, Thomas M. Wing 1, or Thomas Wing 1. Those are mostly where I'm at. A little bit of Instagram tied to the Facebook page. Oh, and LinkedIn, where I'm Thomas M. Wing Writer.
Awesome. I will link all that down below in the description of this video, ladies and gentlemen. And you'd like to see
Thank you,
Thomas.
Gabriel, for having me. I'm sorry, I meant to say that.
No problem, Thomas. No problem. And also, ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to see Thomas back on the show and possibly a roundtable of historical fiction authors that I've had over the years, you know what you have to do. Like this video, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel. Until then, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill, signing out. Wish you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. And we'll see you all in the final episodes for the month of June before we go into July. Until then, have a wonderful day.